Extension methods allow us to add functionality to systems we don't control. They also allow us to write code that is easier to read. In this video, we're going to look at what extension methods are, how to write them, and when to use them. Now, if this is the first video you've watched of mine, my name is Tim Corey, and my goal is to make learning C# easier. I provide videos twice a week here on YouTube to help you grow as a developer. I also have a full set of training courses on IAmTimCorey.com. I would encourage you to check out all the resources I have to offer. Now, in this video, as with most videos, I'm going to create some source code. If you'd like a copy of my source code, use the link in the description. Let's get started. So we're going to go over to Visual Studio, and we're going to create a new project. We're going to create a console application, which is right here. We can just search for console if you don't find it. But it should be console C# application. This will be a .NET Core console application. Now, just a point of clarification here, because .NET has gotten beyond, .NET Core has gotten beyond the version 4, which was where .NET Framework was, they have dropped using the name .NET Core, the core part of it, they've dropped in favor of just saying .NET 5. That is .NET Core, just so you know. So let's hit next, and we're going to call this application something meaningful. Extension demo and extension demo app. And notice .NET 5, that's the current version. I'm going to talk more about this on the Dev Questions episode coming up about, hey, can you use the current version of a framework for a real project? So see that coming up very soon on a Dev Question. That's on Thursdays. It's also, by the way, some people haven't noticed, this is also a podcast. So if you'd rather listen to it than watch it, it's just me on the screen talking. You can get that and pretty much any of the popular podcast plays, Spotify, Apple, and so on. So check it out. Okay, so we've got our console application. This is just a test bed to try out these different things. So I'm going to do all of my code, hopefully in the same window, rather than trying to create different class files for every item. Now, I would encourage you to create separate class files for every item normally. But for this demo, in order to show it all on the same screen at the same time, it will make it easier for you if we put it all on the same screen. So we're going to do it all in one file. And yes, I'm sure you love the fact that a video starts off with "don't do this at home, kids." But in this case, it's just a matter of moving it to the right file. And maybe I even show you that at the end, how you do that. I often develop my classes in the same file so I can see things, and then I just move them off using the quick actions and refactoring. So with that being said, what is an extension method? An extension method is a method that extends something. Makes sense, right? Let's see this in action because I think it'll make a little more sense. First of all, you have to have it in a separate class. So public static class, that class has to be static. And let's just call this extensions for now. And here's the other thing about this. As you get more extension methods, you probably want to group them by type and then name them appropriately. I put multiple in the same class. They would all fall under, let's say, modifying strings, or my basic extensions, or my general toolbox, something like that. So make sure to mark it as static, or this will not work. And the next thing, public static also has to be static method, and we're going to say void as a return type, and let's call this say hi, or how about let's do this, print to console. Okay, I'm going to open and close the paren for now. This is going to be our method. What we want to do is we want to pass in a string, and we want to print it to the console. So we basically do a console write line, but instead of doing it this way, we're going to just print the actual string without having to write console.writeLine. Yes, it's not exactly an innovative solution, but it does demonstrate the extension methods very nicely. So to create an extension method, the big difference, once you have the static class and a static method, the big difference is going to be one extra keyword called this. And what this does is it indicates that this is an extension method, and it's going to extend this next type. So when I say this string, I am now extending the string type. Now, I don't control the string type. I didn't make it. Microsoft did. They own it. But I'm extending it. You can extend any class that you can, pretty much any class you can think of, as long as it's not static as well. But then there's some quirkiness there. But this string, and we're going to say message. I can give it any name I want at this point. This is just the parameter, but we're extending, by saying this, we're extending string. So now I can say console right line or CW tab to use a snippet. And I'll say message, right? So we know how to do this. That's just printing to the console right line, just like this is. But now what we can do is we can delete this up here, and we can say, let's just create a simple string. Let's start with actually creating a string variable. So string demo equals, this is a demo. And then we're going to say demo dot, and notice you type print, you get print to console, which is that new method that I added. How does it know that I can say demo dot? Well, demo is a string type. We just extended that string type with an additional method. So now I can say print to console. And notice it takes in no parameters. And you see, but Tim, we passed in a parameter. Well, yes and no, because we did pass in a parameter, but that parameter is right here. We've added on to the string, and it says, let's pass this in, this demo in as the first parameter. So your extension methods will always have one less parameter than you list here. The one they'll be missing is the one that says this. Let's run this. And this should be a pretty straightforward. It just says this is a demo. So it printed that out to the console. Now, we put that in a variable, but we don't have to. So let's change this again. Let's copy this. I'm going to delete that right there. I'm going to paste it in here. So now you've got an actual string, and I just said dot print to console. Well, this is still a string, so we can still extend it. We can still print to console. And now if we run this, this is a demo. So you can create these extension methods even off of types that Microsoft has created. This is really helpful, probably not for the string and other primitive types, but this is really helpful usually for third-party libraries, where maybe they provide something to you, but it's not the greatest, and you want to add on to it. You want to kind of tweak it the way you want to do it. And we're going to do that in a minute in a simulated way. But the other thing I'll point out here is that right now we get this print to console available to us because we are in the same namespace. But if we're not in the same namespace, so let's do a control dot right now to move this to to extensions.cs. Okay, that's that control dot quick actions and refactoring. And now it added that extensions class. So you know a namespace, I'm not sure if you know, but let's talk about namespaces. You can basically choose any namespace you want. So we could choose extension demo dot extensions, like so, and that will work. But what's going to happen over here is we not get the red squiggly. And that's because we have not brought in the namespace. So in order to do this, we have to come up to the top and say using extensions demo dot extensions. And now that is available to us. I want to show you something else we could do. We're going to take that off. We're going back to extensions, and you have to be very careful of this, but since it is working with a console, I'm going to say system is the namespace. And now when we run this, hold save, well, I'm not bringing anything in yet, but using system. And by doing so, now it allows this. And using system is a pretty common thing to do. If we had used console write line, let's start with our hello world. we would have had to have system brought in anyway, because console is part of system. So we can even merge this with Microsoft's namespaces. Now, this is something to be careful of because you don't want to step on toes, and it's not highly sought after to do because of the fact that you can mess things up. If Microsoft provides already a method called print to console, then you're going to have yours break. It's not going to work. So usually you don't merge your namespace with theirs, but it's possible. I'm just leaving it there like that. So, but instead we're going to call this custom extensions as our namespace. So in order to bring it in over here, let's get rid of our original console, right? We're going to have a using statement for custom extensions. So you have to bring that in order to get your extensions. Now that demonstrates how to extend pretty much anything. If it's a type, you can extend it. But let's talk now about if we get a third-party class. Let's say a public class simple logger. We get this from a third-party vendor. It's not great. It's actually pretty horrible. Public void log string message. And it's going to do a console write line that says message. Okay, that's the big logging system. And they have one more that is public void log string message, and then also string message type. For example, as a warning, an error, or so on. And the only thing that does is it will do a log, and it's going to pass in a string interpolation of the two values. So message type, and then a colon space and a message. Okay, so not really great because what are the types here? Could I put test as my type? Well, sure you could. That's not ideal, but this is the third-party vendor we're forced to work with. And we're locked into using this product. We have to use this product. And so it is what it is, right? We just have to make sure our code uses kind of standard messaging around it. Well, that's one way of doing it. Or we could do is we could write an extension method or a set of extension methods. So let's create a public static class, and we'll call this extend simple logger. And we're going to create a public static void log error. This is a pretty standard thing to do. And we're going to pass in this simple logger. That's the type we're going to override. We're going to call it logger. And we're going to bring in the message as well. So you want to log an error message instead of just passing in for the message type error and hoping it works and hoping it looks right and so on. We're going to do it ourselves. So we're going to make sure that every time it's going to say error properly. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say logger.log, and we're going to pass in the message, and the type is going to be error. So now we know every time we call log error, it's going to pass in the same keyword, type the same, no weird spacing or capitalization. It's always going to be error. So now if we come down here, we say simple logger equals new, oops, semicolon. And we say logger dot log error. This is an error. And you run this, then we'll get that consistent error. This is an error. All right. And let's just take this up another notch. Normally errors show up in a console as a red value. Well, we can actually capture that in our extension method. Var default color equals console dot foreground color. That's to capture what the foreground color is currently. Then we can say console dot foreground color equals color or console color dot red. And then down here, set it back after the log to console dot foreground color equals default color. All right, to set it back to what it was. Now, if we run this, we get that nice, this is an error message. Now let's compare and contrast that with if we have said logger.log and said test error, and we said error, like so. There you go. There's our error. Oops, we have 2 capitalized letters there. Well, bummer. That's what happens when you have a custom string that you have to type out over and over and over again. And by the way, this looks horrible, especially compared to this, the red, where it really pops out as this is an error. And by the way, we had to pass in 2 arguments here, where here it's very clear we're logging an error. Now we could add a few more in here. We could do one for warning. In fact, let's just do one more just to show off we can. So we'll do log warning. And we're gonna say that the message is warning and the color is yellow. And now if we change, or we add one more, logger.log warning now, this is a warning. And just so we're clear here, I'm gonna put a console write line at the end, goodbye. Just so you can say that it set the value back to the correct one. There we go. This is an error, this is a warning, and goodbye. So we have played around with logging out different messaging, being very clear about what that messaging is, a warning, an error, and so on, instead of just log. So I'd create one that says info, I'd create one that says debug, the standard ones that come in iLogger. And you could say, well, just implement iLogger. Well, yeah, but we don't necessarily control this simple logger, which I believe actually simple logger is a totally different thing. I think that there's actually is a simple logger out there. But we don't control this. We don't control this third-party library that they provide us with just 2 methods that don't do a great job at their job. We can still use them. We're still using the logger, but we're extending it to add more functionality and to make it cleaner in how it does its job and to make it cleaner in how it presents what it is doing. So instead of saying log, oh, that's an error log, we can see log error, log warning. So very clear stuff. Extension methods are also used to chain things together in a way that really makes it readable what's happening. So you can take a class and you can chain together. If you return, instead of return void, you return the class that you're extending, you can actually chain them together and do things like print. So you have a person class, you say print to console, log information, and so on in the same line. So, in theory, it might look something like person dot print, like maybe just print log info and save to database, something like that. And if you read that code, even though none of those exist right now, but if they did with extension methods, we'd know exactly what's going on. It's printing out the person, it's logging that info, and it's saving the information to the database. So pretty clear what it does, which is one of the benefits of extension methods. And you're not passing in, because if this was written without extension methods, what you would see is probably, if you want to do it in one line, save to database, log info, print person. Okay, how easy is that to read? By having this dot notation where we chain them together, it's much easier to read. You have much less nesting going on. So there are some benefits to extension methods. Now, let's talk about when we would use extension methods, because the answer is not all the time. There are some benefits to it. There's a lot of benefits to extension methods, and we really have a lot of value add from them. But like with anything, we don't just use one option for everything. So extension methods are usually best when you're extending things you don't own. So that's one thing. So our example here was we got a logger from a third-party provider, and we extended it to be better and more standardized. That's a great option for extension methods. Another one is if you want to bring in a dependency, but you don't want that class to depend on it. For example, in our saved database example here, where the person class, let's say, is a simple data class where it has first name, last name, and a couple of properties, and that's about it. Well, we don't necessarily want that to depend on the database, but we could extend it and pass in my DB connection or something like that, where we're passing in the database connection information into this method and saying, okay, this person saved at the database, and by the way, here is the database connection, but we don't want this person class to have to know about that database. That can be a good way to separate out and not have that dependency be put into the class. So another way that this can be beneficial is we can apply these just the same to interfaces. So let's really quickly create an interface for extend simple logger. I'm sorry, not to extend simple logger, to simple logger. So control dot, and we're going to extract interface. And we'll do it to a new file. That's fine. It's going to bring those two methods. And now we have IAmTimCorey. Cool. And if I say, okay, up here, I want this to be new simple logger, but go to an IAmTimCorey logger. Well, our extensions don't work anymore. That's because we need to say this is an IAmTimCorey logger. And now they work. And in fact, let's just demo that to make sure. Always good to run your code. And they do work. So what does that benefit us? Well, now I have not only extended the simple logger class, but any other class that also implements the IAmTimCorey logger. You can actually extend multiple classes with just one extension method. So you can bring the same functionality to multiple classes that may not have otherwise had it. And instead of modifying multiple classes, you modify one extension or create one extension, and that applies to all of them. So there's a lot of benefits here. When would you not use an extension method? Well, the first place I demonstrated adding to the string this print to console. If you find yourself doing an awful lot of that, and you find that really is a time saver and it's a cleaner way of doing things, maybe. But don't go crazy extending, especially the primitive types, but really any of the types that Microsoft provides. Because if you do, what you're going to find is you have a mess where you do the, this list right here, which already scrolls pretty significantly. Well, if you add 50 new commands to that, that's going to be really complicated to navigate. So be careful of that. I would limit this to only the absolute necessary things for the Microsoft types. When you get into your own types, if you find that that provides a value to you, you don't want to modify your existing class item, for example, but you want to extend it, that's fine. But if you can modify your existing class item and put the functionality in the class, that's usually cleaner. So don't just create an empty class and then extend it like crazy, okay? That's not exactly the purpose or design of this. But this will provide some benefits to expanding the functionality of the class in a way that wasn't originally intended. So you can modify that class without modifying the class. You can leave the class alone and then extend it. If you went through my solid series, which I recommend doing, the open-close principle talks about being open for extension, but closed to modification. Well, this is what this would be, is you've got something working, don't mess with it. So if you need to add a new method to a class and you already have it working in production, then instead of modifying that class and potentially having to retest half your application or more and potentially adding bugs to your application, extend the class. That way you're not impacting the existing functionality, you're just adding on top of it. Now, another thing to talk about is these using statements. I would encourage you to group your extensions based upon type or use, and then put them in their own namespaces. That way you can bring them in and take them out. And the reason why you want to do that is because you got to be very careful not to step on toes when it comes to naming. If you name something the same as an existing instantiated class method, then that class method will win out and your extension will not work. So that's a problem, okay? You don't want to have that naming conflict. So instead what you want to have is you want to have just the extensions you need brought in at any one time. So think that one through, make sure that you kind of group things in a logical manner instead of having just one grab bag or putting everything, goodness, don't put everything in system. That would be bad because it would make debugging a nightmare when it came to trying to figure out why things aren't working, to figure out which thing is stepping on which thing's toes. So use your own namespaces for the most part and use ones that make sense and limit the impact of how many extensions you have applied at any one time. So that's extension methods. At the very heart of it is just static class, static method, this keyword. Those three things, and you've got a extension method. Beyond that, there are some things to think about of when to use this and when not to. This is one of those cases where you can learn about something in about 2 minutes. Learn about, okay, static, this, got it. But it's the when to use it and when not to use it that's really important. That's where we get into real world use, okay? So let's move these out into their own files. So just going to do Control dot on the name and say move type to their own file. There we go. Now I have backed away from that doing everything in one file, and I have them in separate files for you to use. This source code will be down below the video. You have to click on the link, fill out your email address. It will be emailed to you. And yeah, there's no charge. People get confused with that. The TimCo Retail Manager series, if you want the source code for that whole series, that's $5 a month on Patreon or the equivalent of that in your local currency. But for normal standalone videos like this, there is no charge for the source code. It's just your email address. That's the charge. And yes, you'll get put on a mailing list of upcoming things that I offer, but there's an unsubscribe at the bottom of every mailing list that you can jump right off it, okay? So with that, thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. If you have thoughts on other videos you want to see from me, leave those down in the comments below as well. I read those. I try to keep up on what people are looking for. And this is actually one of those videos that people are looking for. So that's why I create it. Okay. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.